Well, as some of you all know, I had an opportunity to travel a couple of weeks ago. Went to Florida, went to Disney, saw Star Wars and Harry Potter, and had an amazing, amazing time. And one of the things that I love about traveling are the airport bookstores. I know, they're way overpriced, I get that. But I always find something that I haven't seen anywhere else. And you know, what else are you gonna do, sit at the gate? So I love looking at the airport bookstores. And I suddenly saw a couple things that I needed to have. And so I bought a book on leadership and then a book on the Enneagram. And if you're not familiar with the Enneagram, it's an ancient personality typing system. If you know about it, I'm actually an Enneagram 2. And if you want to know more, let me know and we can talk about it because it's fascinating. And it's really helped me personally and professionally to know how I function in this world. And the premise of the book, The Story of You, is this. The Enneagram reveals how each of us inhabits a broken story that runs counter to the larger story of divine grace and who we were created to be. And I thought, cool. So I bought it. What I was not expecting was that it would help me completely rethink the way I view the Transfiguration story. I began to realize that what Jesus was working on with the disciples, and ultimately with us as well, was moving all of us from the old story to the new story. And it's a new story that he continues to create with us. Now, I am sure my seatmate next to me thought I was strange because I was furiously writing in the book and I was furiously writing on my sermon notes because I brought my all my sermon stuff to prep because you get 3 hours of time, you might as well be productive. And I'm sure I was muttering to myself. So every once in a while he kind of look at me and I'm like, just don't bother me. I'm just all in it. So it was really fun. So here's what I gleaned from all of this. The Transfiguration story is highlighting in a very, very over-the-top fashion Jesus' constant push forward into the new story of the power of the kingdom of God, what I call God's economy. It's a system that God created that throws everything on its head. The first shall be last, the last shall be first, you give up your life to save it, all those things. God's economy, the new story. That's the push. It also highlights the pull back to the old ways of doing things, the old story, what we know, what makes us comfortable, the way we always have done things. In fact, the book of Luke shows us the constant push and pull between the new and the old stories. In the first part of this chapter, Luke 9, Jesus is revealing the new story both experientially and verbally. And let me give you a little summary because it helps us. Experientially, Jesus, in the beginning of the book, sends out the disciples to practice living out the new story. And if you remember the story, he sends them out with nothing but new tools to use, his power and authority over all things. No cash, no carry-on luggage. Go and love people. See what happens. And by the way, he does the same with us now. And you know what? It worked. They came back with stories of successes. And then this little thing happened where a huge crowd was fed with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And everybody had enough. And there was so much left, they got to-go bags, or really in that time, to-go baskets. God's economy. Out of scarcity comes abundance. Real life experiences revealing the new story in real time in a very real fashion. And Jesus was verbally acknowledging this reality to the disciples. Yes, he was the Messiah. And oh, by the way, I'm going to die and be raised from the dead in 3 days. God's economy. It makes absolutely 0 sense. Ultimately, this became experiential as well because we know what happens at Easter. Everything was turned upside down. The new story became the story for the disciples. I'm getting ahead of myself. For the disciples, these experiences were to help them move from their old story to the new story. Sending them out without carry-on luggage forced them to rely on this new story, forced them to rely on the tools that Jesus gave them. They couldn't use what worked before. And we know that even though they had these amazing experiences, they still were not getting it. So Jesus took the A-team, James, John, and Peter, on an excursion to literally have a mountaintop experience, to embed this new story into their souls, to change and transform them, to reveal to them something really, really powerful. And even with this spectacular, unbelievable supernatural experience that should have drawn them forward into this new way of living, the pull of the old was really too strong. And even with all that Peter had experienced, he is still clueless. The truth is, we are far more like Peter, well, at least pre-resurrection Peter. We want to build tents that will never be able to contain the love and the power and the white-hot light that's on that mountain. Because we have a hard time seeing and understanding what is happening in those moments. That's why we say hindsight is 20/20, because we have the perspective that comes with the analysis that we didn't and weren't able to use in those moments. We have a little bit more wisdom, a little more clarity of vision. And that's the most difficult part of the new story. We have to trust in something we cannot see. I mean, if the disciples couldn't do it after basically having a UFO appear in front of them, it's going to be really hard for us. That old story, it has a strong, strong pull. Even when that strange otherworldly cloud enveloped them, they heard a voice saying, "Listen to Jesus. Let him tell you this new story. Let him show you the new story. Listen." Glitter and confetti cannons have gone off at this point for them. With disco and strobe lights all over, God spoke. And the A-team responded with silence and inaction to this massive mountaintop experience. And before we judge them, we do exactly the same thing. Why? Well, because of this phrase, the next day. We go back to our regular lives. Work still has to happen. The kids, they still have to be fed. Life moves forward, back to reality. The same thing happens in Luke 9:37. The next day, they come down from the mountain, and there's that crowd waiting for them. As an aside, I always wonder who this crowd was, because this crowd just seemed to shift and follow Jesus wherever he went. But that's reality and normal life for the disciples and Jesus. Now remember that the disciples were sent out to live in the new story, and they came back with success stories. Remember that in the beginning? Well, they were not always successful. And that's where this kid who needs healing enters our scene. Many of the translations say demon-possessed. But when you read his symptoms of convulsing, not having control over his body, foaming at the mouth, it sounds more like he has a seizure disorder. And some kind, maybe epilepsy, right? We have modern medicine now to inform us. But they did not. And things were blamed on demons or spirits up until more recently, really, up until the 20th century. The disciples, even with all the power and authority that Jesus gave them, even with having the new story in their lives, they weren't able to heal this poor kid. Old story. Jesus has asked for help. I think Jesus' response is way over the top. "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you?" And I was like, wait, what? I get that they likely didn't have enough faith. I mean, we all sit in that space. But perverse? I was like, that's way too much. So I looked up, being the nerd that I am, I looked it up in the Greek as well as the English. And here's a good definition of perverse, because I was clearly missing something. This is from the Oxford Languages. This is of a person of their actions, showing a deliberate and obstinate desire to behave in a way that is unreasonable and unacceptable, often in spite of the consequences. Still, that's pretty harsh. But I believe Jesus is indicating that the disciples had all that they needed to heal this kid. They had it all. They had the tools. And we know from the other Gospels that when the disciples asked why they could not heal this poor kid, Jesus responsible, it's possible only through prayer and fasting, which is a tool Jesus uses all the time, by the way. They had all they needed to heal this poor child. And I think Jesus is chastising them, and us, for that matter, for intentionally leaning on the old story and not living in the new. Still, though, it's pretty harsh. They're just learning, right? This is practice. Jesus healed the boy. They all were astounded, per the usual. No UFOs this time. Likely not even silence. But I'm sure that father cried tears of joy. So what does the Transfiguration tell us? I always want to say transmogrify, sorry. The Transfiguration tell us. What does it do for us? We're not necessarily going to see the divine Jesus bathed in a holy, otherworldly light, chatting with all the stars of our faith. I'm not sure we would believe what we were seeing if we did see that. It would be cool to have that kind of glitter cannon disco ball moment. We've all likely had and needed a mountaintop experience, but they don't drive everyday life. Now, we live in the tedium of life, don't we? What we can do is work toward the practice of intentionally living in the new story. The practice of intentionally living in the new story. We are the ambassadors of God's economy. We are desperately, desperately needed. We bring the new story to earth. We bring this new story to life. How? Really simple. Through love. And I can tell you, you are already doing this, at least in my life. When I came here, I wasn't even sure I wanted to be in ministry. I was giving it one last try. And mind you, I have had big mountaintop experiences. And by that I mean UFO level experiences. But what sustains me and what helped me believe in the church again has been the next day here at NUMC. Living out regular life. In these unremarkable times, I heard my call to ministry again. In a church that appears to have scarcity, we have abundance. And the abundance is all of you. This is a community where the new story is being told. And it manifests in hope, at least in this kid's life. We actually had a mountaintop moment last Sunday when this body voted for the 2022 budget. It's scary and invigorating and beautiful. And you fill in the blanks for how it was for you. We are taking a huge leap of faith. And I know what it means to step up to nothing. I believe in the vision Pastor Krista has cast for this community because I know the origin. I know the creator of this new story for us. And he shows up in bright lights as well as in silence. We're being asked to go out into our neighborhood without any baggage, only with our love for others and our incredible gifts of connection. Let's chase this new story. Let's invite others to join us in writing these new words. And may we have some moments of glitter cannons and disco balls. Amen? Amen. Thanks be to God.